Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia and welcome back to our 10 parts guide series covering reforms in Total War 3 Kingdoms. This episode is part 6 and will be an overview of the blue reforms. With this episode, we'll be wrapping up all the colors and concluding our intermediate sections of the guide series. Starting next week, this guide series will begin the advanced section with the building unlock strategies and unit unlock strategy guides. So please subscribe to the channel to get notifications when new videos drop. In the meantime, let's get started with the blue reforms. As you can see here, there are a total of 16 blue reforms. They correspond to the strategist class and provide unlocks to strategist retinue units. They also unlock market and learning buildings, increase the number of trade routes and spies you can employ, provide bonuses to trade influence and character experience, and improve your diplomatic relationship with other factions. Today we'll be going over all 16 of these reforms individually, but before we can do that, I want to continue what we have done with all the other colors and first redraw the blue portion of the reform tree, so we can do away with the artistic branches and show clear line of progression. This will alleviate the overcrowding on the screen and improve our discussion. As you can see here, I've redrawn the reform tree for the blue reforms in the same style that we have done so for the other colors. In the description below the video will be a link to all the redrawn version of the reform tree. If you found these rendering helpful during the guide series, feel free to download them and use them as planning tools for your campaign. If you look at the Silk Road Expedition reform at the bottom of the screen here, I have it highlighted in purple because it requires the Mercantile Restrictions purple reform to unlock. We have seen similar requirements in other colors, as this is due to the Wuxing synergy interactions in the game, which weaves the branches of different colors together, according to the property of Wuxing. Other than that, we can apply tiers here once again to facilitate our discussion. Now, given how interconnected the blue reforms are, it was actually quite difficult to organize them into tiers, and I was forced to push a lot more reforms into higher tiers to fit everything in a logical and organized manner on the screen. So please don't let the tier levels be an indication of how strong a certain reform is. Any reform in any tier could be a great reform. And as we have seen in the past few parts of this series covering the other colors, there have been some great reforms in the lower tiers, and also some really bad reforms in the higher tiers. So as we move on to talk about the 3 Tier 1 reforms, keep in mind that I broke down my drawings of the reform tree into tiers to simply showcase clear lines of progression and keep the guide organized rather than have them be an indication of how strong certain reforms are. Alright, let's start things off with Liu Bo. This reforms requires the level 1 in-building to be unlocked. It provides a passive bonus of 25% increase to trade influence, and the in-game info panel states that this reform will unlock a branch that will increase influence when trading with other factions. Since the name of this reform is in Chinese and totally nondescript, allow me to share a little serious trivia with y'all. Liu Bo is an ancient Chinese board game played between 2 players that was likely a predecessor to Chinese chess. The name Liu Bo can be broken down to 2 words, Liu and Bo. Liu means 6 because the objective of the game is to score 6 points, and Bo means a competition. So combined, it literally means first to 6. Going back to reforms, we have the private tutors reform next. The in-game info panel states that this reform will enable a branch that will lead to better and faster growing generals. So it is no surprise that the level 1 school building is the requirement for this reform, and its passive bonus is a 10% boost to character experience. It is also worth noting that this is the linchpin reform for the blue reforms, as without it, most of the blue reform would simply disappear as shown here. Lastly, we have the foreign envoy. The in-game info panel states that this reform will enable a branch that will make more trade agreements and stronger commerce. This is the true starter reform for the blue reform, as it has no building requirement, and if your faction is deemed to be a commerce or trade focused faction, then this will be your free starting reform. In terms of bonuses, the foreign envoy increases your trade agreements by 1, and trade agreements are one of the best ways to make money and improve diplomatic ties in the early game, so I highly recommend you to consider this reform as one of your earlier reforms. Moving on, we have the 5 Tier 2 reforms. Here we start with the market administration, which adds 30% to commerce income. Next, we have the annual proficiency report, which reduces character salaries by 10%, followed by the masterful disguise techniques, which has a bunch of interesting passive bonuses. To start, it adds 4 cover costs for enemy spies and 2 undercover costs for enemy spies. It also increases your total number of spying positions by 1, so essentially this reform reduces the efficiency of enemy spies by requiring them to use more cover costs and undercover network costs when conducting missions on you, while also increasing the number of spies you can deploy. Next, we have the diplomatic missions, which has a simple passive bonus of adding 25% to your trade influence. And lastly, we have the Sino-Roman Embassy. This is the only Tier 2 reform to not branch out of the private tutor reform, as this continues from foreign envoys and adds another available trade agreement. Moving on to Tier 3, we have Weiqi, which is another board game reform. It is no surprise this reform continues from Liu Bo. If the term Weiqi sounds a bit familiar to you, it is probably because it is known by another name in the West. Weiqi is the Chinese name for the game of Go, the same Go game that AlphaGo is created to beat. It is a simple game to learn, but an impossible game to master, and have long been seen as a military strategy and philosophy-based game in Chinese history. Many of the famous characters around this time were avid Go players, so it is no surprise to see it as a reform here. Its passive bonus includes a 25% boost to trade influence and a plus 12 to strategist satisfaction. Next, we have the dedicated spy network reform. This obviously continues the masterful disguise techniques reform from Tier 2 and provides a 10% upkeep cost discount for your new spies, plus 5 undercover costs for enemy spies, and adds another additional spy position to your faction. This continues the trend of making enemy spies less efficient while allowing you to field more spies who are now cheaper too. Lastly, we had the Silk Road Expedition reform. This reform adds another trade agreement to your faction and boosts income from silk and spices by 40%. This is one of the few reforms that can help you boost these lucrative alternative income sources, so it can be quite valuable once you gain control of these counties. Now, another thing to note is that the Silk Road Expedition reform does require the purple reform of Mercantile Restriction to unlock, so please keep that in mind when you're planning out to reach this reform. Moving on to Tier 4 reforms, we have the Handbook of Excellence, which reduces character salaries by 10% and increases strategist satisfaction by 8 points. This is followed by the Divine Manipulation of Threads, which is another spying reform that reduces upkeep cost of new spies by another 15%, increases the cover cost for enemy spies by 5, and increases your spying positions available to you by another 1. Lastly, we have arrived at the 3 Tier 5 reforms, starting with economic stimulation. We have a reform that provides 50% boost to trade influence. This is followed by the Treatise on Human Beings, which adds 1 additional assignment slot and increases character experience gain by 10%. And to wrap up this quick individual overview of all 16 blue reforms, we have the Way of the Great Peace, which boosts your diplomatic relationship with all factions by 10 points and increase your faction satisfaction by 10 points as well. Now that we have gone through all the individual reforms, let's take a step back and look at our rendering of the blue portion of the reform tree here and analyze the bigger picture by looking at it branch by branch, because after all, that's how you acquire these reforms in the game. To start, we have the inn or the commerce branch shown here. It ends with Weiqi, and you will most likely go for this branch when you're building out the inn building chain or when you're focusing on commerce income. The whole chain will provide you 50% boost to trade influence, plus 12 points to strategist satisfaction, plus 10% character experience, and another 30% commerce income multiplier boost. Next, we have the Salt Mine branch. Unlocking this branch gives you plus 50% to trade influence, plus 8 points to strategist satisfaction, a 30% boost to commerce income, and a 10% discount to character salary, and a 10% boost to character experience. Now, I named this branch Salt Mine Branch because I want to make a point about the Salt Mine Specialty County, which has upgrades that are unlocked by reforms in this branch. If we take a look at the Specialty County here, I want to bring attention to two main things. One, this county is color-coded as purple, and the income provided is the purple industry income. So nothing's wrong here. However, my second point is that the Wuxing building synergy provided here is for agriculture or green buildings, and not for the expected market and learning or blue buildings. This fact was recently pointed out to me by one of my subscribers during my Chengdu Commandery Guide video. It was something I overlooked because how consistent the color code system worked everywhere else in the game. The Salt Mine is a unique case of a county that is colored purple, but requires blue reforms to unlock higher level upgrades rather than the standard mining purple branch, starting with the shaft mining reform. Furthermore, the discount to mining construction given by shaft mining reform excludes the salt mine. So I feel like the salt mine should be a blue colored county. We already have green counties like tea and fishing port that produce commerce or blue income, so why can't we have a blue county in the salt mine that produces industry income? It will make all the color coding much more consistent in the game, and I have voiced this concern on the Total War forum to CA James, hoping that they will make this simple change. Next, we move on to the school branch here. This branch unlocks the school building upgrades and provides an extra assignment slot, a 20% bonus to character experience, a 10% discount to character salary, and plus 8 points to strategist satisfaction. Next, we move on to the spying branch. This requires the same private tutor and annual proficiency report to unlock, so it shares some of the same bonuses with our earlier school branch, but its key unique bonuses are all spying related. We have a total of 25% discount to spying upkeep costs, plus 3 possible spying positions, and a plus 9 cover cost and a plus 7 undercover network costs for enemy spies. Next, we have the diplomacy branch shown here. This branch also builds off the school branch, so it does share a lot of bonuses once again, but the key reform here is the tier 5 Way of Great Peace, which adds 10-point satisfaction for all your own characters and a plus 10-point diplomatic relationship with all other factions. Lastly, we have the trade/trade port branch. With this branch, you will unlock 3 additional trade routes, gain 40% boost to silk and spice income, a 25% boost to trade influence, and also the always 10% boost to character experience that you get from private tutor reform that exists in all these branches. So given how the private tutors reform is required for every single branch in the blue reform, it is important that you should always consider to build an early school building just to unlock this private tutor reform before demolishing the school building afterwards, because it's not such a great early game building. With that, this concludes the part 6 of the series covering the blue reform. I hope you can take something learned here and add to your game, and look forward having y'all back as we move on to the more advanced sections of this reform guide series starting next weekend. As requested, I've provided a link below to the complete rendering of all my redrawn portions of the reform tree in the description below to help you guys plan ahead in your games. Once again, if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel to receive notification of the latest episode, guides, and Let's Play videos. I also happily take requests in the comment section for other guides as well, and welcome general suggestions to help improve this channel, so please feel free to drop a comment below. I hope y'all have enjoyed this video, and please remember to come back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to kick off our new lore series covering the events surrounding the 8 Princes time period. I'm super excited for that and can't wait to see y'all then. Bye!